The year was 1871, and the Wyoming wind didn't give a damn who you were. It cut through coat and skin all the same. It howled across the desolate tracks where the Union Pacific had just thundered past, leaving behind only smoke, steam, and the silence of indifference. A single figure remained where the crowd had once been, hunched beneath a threadbare shawl, her hands trembling against the cold iron of her trunk. Abigail Woodson stood ankle-deep in snow, her boots soaked through, lips tinged blue. 40 winters had not yet claimed her body, but the fine lines near her eyes and the silver strands in her pinned-up hair told a different story to any man who came looking. Apparently, 40 was too old for a new beginning, too old for a second chance. He had taken one look at her, just one, and said, "This ain't what I ordered." She hadn't replied. What was there to say? That she still had her teeth? That she'd baked the biscuits he'd mentioned in his letters every Sunday to practice? That she'd sewn her own dress for the occasion, though her fingers ached with the early signs of arthritis? None of it mattered when his eyes, cold as the prairie sky, had raked over her and found her wanting. The man had turned, spat tobacco in the snow, and climbed back aboard the train. Now he was gone, and she was not. Abigail clutched her shawl tighter, though the wind had long since chewed through its warmth. Her trunk, stuffed with the last of her mother's linens, a Bible, and a tin of shortbread, sat heavy beside her like a tombstone. She'd stood there for near an hour, hoping someone would come back. The conductor, a porter, even a stable boy. But the platform was empty. The depot shack was locked tight. There was no welcome, no warning. Just the whiteness of the land stretching wide and cold in every direction. She sat down on the trunk, forcing her chattering teeth to still. She would not cry. She had made it across 2 states on nothing but courage and careful correspondence. She'd endured catcalls from drunkards on the train, suspicious glances from matrons, the snide pity of younger women. She had come here to be someone's wife, not an ornament, not a burden, but a partner. She had offered warmth, steadiness, the kind of love that didn't burn hot and then vanish. The kind that lasted. But nobody wanted that kind. Not anymore. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the cold deepened. Abigail forced her limbs to move, dragging the trunk off the platform and down onto the packed trail that led away from the tracks. She remembered seeing a small sign from the window as the train pulled in, Dry Creek, 2 miles. If she could make it there, maybe someone would take her in for the night. The snow crunched beneath her boots, the kind of sound that made you feel small in a world too big for its own good. Her skirts were already stiffening with frost. Her gloved hands, threadbare and frayed, curled into fists beneath her shawl. Every step became harder than the last, but she did not stop. She had no one to stop for. Half a mile in, the wind picked up. It screamed like a child denied, ripping through the pines and flinging snow sideways. Abigail stumbled, catching herself on a fallen branch, pain shooting up her wrist. She didn't curse. There was no energy for that now. Only movement, one foot then the other. At the base of a small ridge, her knees gave out. She hit the snow hard, the breath knocked from her chest. For a long moment, she lay still. The white sky spun above her. The cold crept in through her spine, numbing her thoughts. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her lungs struggling to pull in air. So this is how it ends, she thought, not with screams but silence. Alone, she thought of her mother's hands, brushing flour from her apron, of her father's voice reading from the good book in the evenings. She thought of the orchard she grew up near, and how the blossoms smelled in spring. She thought of the man who wrote her letters full of sweet words and promises, and of the look on his face when he'd seen her in person. Disgust, disappointment. Her eyelids fluttered. Snowflakes melted on her cheeks like tears she hadn't let fall. She didn't hear the crunch of boots, didn't see the man standing at the edge of the trail, rifle slung over one shoulder, scarf drawn tight across his face. He stood still for a moment, studying the figure crumpled in the snow. Caleb McGraw hadn't intended to come this far down from the ridge. He'd been hunting rabbits near the river and saw the storm rolling in. It wasn't safe to linger, but something, instinct perhaps or plain bad luck, had drawn him off course. The sight of the woman in the snow hit him like a fist. He approached slowly, wary. Not many women wandered the Wyoming wilds alone, and fewer still ended up freezing under trees without reason. His boots cracked through the ice as he knelt beside her. Her face was pale as wax, lips parted slightly. He touched her wrist. Pulse, faint but there. She murmured something unintelligible, her eyes fluttering open for the briefest second. Caleb hesitated. He didn't take strays. He didn't get involved. He had lost too much to the cruelty of chance already. But to leave her, with a low grunt, he shoved his rifle across his back and bent to lift her. She was lighter than she looked. Her frame was strong, but too thin, her fingers stiff with cold. He shifted her against his chest and turned back toward the ridge. The snow was thicker now. Each step up the incline was a fight. Caleb's breath plumed white into the darkening air. His cabin wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes if he kept his pace. But the storm didn't care for his timing. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. It was the only thing in his life that hadn't abandoned him. He shoved open the door with his shoulder and kicked it shut behind him. The warmth struck like a slap, and he crossed quickly to the bed, laying her gently down. He unwrapped her shawl, pulled off her boots, half frozen, and wrapped her in every blanket he could find. He wasn't much of a nurse, but he'd buried a wife and child already. He wasn't about to bury a stranger without trying. He fed the fire until it roared. Heated water, mixed a weak broth from dried beans and leftover rabbit. He peeled her gloves off, revealing fingers white at the tips, almost blue. Frostbite, maybe worse. Still, she breathed. He sat beside her most of the night, not sleeping, watching, waiting. At some point near dawn, her eyes opened again, wide, glassy, then focused on him. "Where?" she rasped. "You're safe," he said gruffly. "You were freezing. Found you near Dry Creek." She blinked slowly. "Train." "He left me." He said nothing, just handed her a mug of warm broth. She held it with shaking hands. "You live here?" she asked after a time, voice hoarse. He nodded. "Alone?" "Yeah." Her gaze lingered on the framed photo above the hearth, a woman and a child. His wife, Sarah, and their boy Thomas. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. "I'm Abigail," she said softly. "Caleb," he replied. A long silence stretched between them. The storm howled outside, furious and wild. Inside, the fire crackled. He watched her sip, watched the way her fingers curled around the mug like she was afraid it might vanish. "Why were you out there alone?" he asked finally. "My husband," she said, then corrected herself, "was supposed to be." Another pause. He changed his mind. Caleb exhaled through his nose. "Bastard." A corner of her mouth lifted. Almost a smile. He stood, clearing the empty mug. "You'll need to rest. Got extra quilts in the chest. I'll sleep by the fire." "You don't have to." "I do." He didn't wait for her reply. The next morning, Abigail awoke to the smell of bacon. Her bones ached, but the color had returned to her cheeks. Caleb moved quietly around the small space, like a man used to silence. She watched him work, noticed the scar across his jaw, the way his eyes darted toward the window, always watching, like he expected the world to take something else from him at any moment. He handed her a plate without a word. She took it, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she managed. "You're lucky," he said. "Another hour and you'd have frozen clean through." "I'm not used to being lucky." He glanced at her then, eyes dark. "Me neither." They ate in silence. The fire hissed. Snow fell. Outside, the storm still owned the land. But inside that little cabin, something fragile had begun to thaw. Not just limbs, not just frostbitten skin, but something deeper. Something in the way Caleb looked at her, like she wasn't past her prime, just worn at the edges. And in the way Abigail looked at him and didn't see a man broken by grief, but one still standing. She would not ask to stay. Not yet. He would not offer. Not yet. But the silence between them had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning. The snow didn't let up for 4 days. For long days in which the world outside Caleb's cabin disappeared behind a veil of white, and two strangers found themselves bound by proximity, silence, and survival. Abigail moved slowly at first, her limbs stiff, her breath shallow. The frostbite on her fingers wasn't as bad as it could have been. She'd keep them all, thanks to Caleb's quick action. But the ache in her joints and the tightness in her chest reminded her every time she stirred that she'd come within a breath of death. Still, she insisted on rising each morning, dressing as best she could, and helping where she was allowed. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye as she swept the floor or stirred the pot over the fire. She moved like someone used to doing, not waiting. He respected that. She didn't ask for pity, didn't fill the air with chatter. She gave him space, and in that space, something began to change. She noticed the way he kept one rifle by the door, another hanging over the mantel. The way he always checked the windows before he sat. He moved with a quiet purpose, like a man who expected trouble before peace. She didn't press him, not at first, though questions stirred behind her ribs. And Caleb, he noticed the neatness of her habits, how she folded her shawl precisely before laying it aside, how she hummed beneath her breath while cutting potatoes. He noticed, too, the sadness that never quite left her face, a sadness that matched his own, though neither spoke of it directly. On the fifth morning, the storm passed. The sun cut through the clouds in golden shards, making the snow outside glow like fields of diamonds. Abigail stood at the window, fingers pressed to the frosted glass. "I should leave," she said quietly, not turning. Caleb looked up from the fire where he was sharpening his knife. "Go where?" "To town. Dry Creek." He said nothing. "They might have work," she continued. "A room to rent. I can't stay here. It ain't proper." His hands stilled. "Ain't no one around for miles to care about proper." She turned to face him. "Still, you'll freeze halfway there. Snow's waist-high in some spots. I've walked through worse. You almost died out there." She didn't flinch. "I know." He met her eyes. Something passed between them, challenge, maybe, or understanding. He saw it then, what lay beneath her calm pride. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to be saved, not by anyone, especially not a man. "You got someone waiting for you?" he asked. "No. Family." She shook her head. He set the knife down gently. "You can stay, Abigail, as long as you want. Cabin's plenty big for two." She took a breath. "And what would folks say?" He gave a wry smile. "Ain't no folks around to say it. But one day there will be. And they'll talk. Call me your kept woman." Caleb stood slowly across the room. He wasn't a man for speeches, but he'd lost too much to let silence steal this moment. "I buried my wife 3 winters ago," he said, voice low. "Fever took her and our boy in the same week. Since then, this cabin's been full of ghosts. You're the first living soul to make it feel like a home again." She looked at him, eyes glassy. "I ain't a skin for promises," he added. "Just don't leave yet. Not till spring." She swallowed hard. "And after spring?" He hesitated. "I reckon we'll talk then." So she stayed. Days passed with the rhythm of survival. Chopping wood, boiling snow for water, tending to the meager garden Caleb had managed before the freeze. He showed her how to set snares, how to gut a rabbit. She taught him how to patch torn shirts and stretch stew when meat was lean. One morning, while gathering kindling from the woodshed, Abigail found a small wooden horse half buried in the snow. She brushed it off, the carving rough but tender. A child's toy. Later that night, she set it gently on the mantel beside the photograph. Caleb didn't say a word, but his eyes lingered on it for a long time. Come February, the silence between them grew companionable. They spoke more, and yet it wasn't the words that deepened things. It was the small moments. Her laughter one evening when he nearly burned the bread. The way he fixed the drafty window after noticing her shiver. How she always left the fire built just right before going to bed. But peace was a fragile thing in the West. One gray afternoon, Caleb rode out to check the trap lines, leaving Abigail alone. She busied herself with laundry, then started a stew. She didn't notice the sound of horses until they were nearly on the cabin. 3 riders, all dust and leather and menace. She saw them through the frost-glazed window, hard men, unshaven and grim. They dismounted without a word, moving with purpose. She stepped back from the door, heart thudding. A fist pounded the wood. "Anyone home?" She didn't answer. The latch rattled. Then the door creaked open, and a tall man with a broken nose stepped inside, followed by another with a shotgun. Well, the tall one said, looking her over. What V we got here? I think she's his new squeeze, the other chuckled. Didn't peg McGraw for the type. Abigail kept her voice even. What do you want? The third man came in, eyes cold. We're looking for Caleb. He owes us. Owes you what? Answers. Men don't get to disappear after what he did. Her blood turned to ice. I don't know anything about that, she said. You know he's not here, the tall one said. That's enough. They moved through the cabin, ransacking quickly, kicking over chairs, rifling through drawers. One yanked the photo from the mantel and sneered. Then the door burst open again, and Caleb stood there, snow still clinging to his coat, rifle raised. Step away, he growled. The three men turned, weapons half drawn, but not fast enough. Jeb, don't, one warned. Put it down, McGraw, the tall one said. Ain't gotta go this way. You're in my home, Caleb said. You should have thought of that. The next few moments were a blur. One of the men lunged. Caleb fired once, twice. The cabin filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. One man fell. Another fled. The third crashed through the door, clutching his side. Abigail stood frozen, hands to her mouth. Caleb lowered the rifle, his chest heaving. You all right? She nodded slowly, though she couldn't stop shaking. He crossed the room, laid a hand on her shoulder. I didn't mean for you to see that, he murmured. You didn't have a choice, she said. He looked at her then, truly looked. They were part of the crew I used to ride with. After I lost Sarah, I wasn't right. Got mixed up in things. Robberies. Violence. I walked away before it got worse. But they never forgave me for leaving. And now they found you. He nodded. She took a shaky breath. Will they come back? Probably. He stepped away, started barricading the door. That night, neither of them slept. They sat before the fire, both watchful, weapons nearby. You should go, he said once. Before they come back. And end up frozen again? She replied softly. I mean it, Abigail. You don't owe me anything. She turned to him. I didn't stay because I owed you. He looked away. Caleb, she said gently, you saved my life. Let me help save yours. He met her eyes, something breaking loose in his chest. He hadn't cried since the funeral, but now something welled up, grief, fear, maybe hope. He buried it deep. Spring would come, and with it decisions. But for now, they had each other. For now, they'd fight to keep what little peace they'd found. The thaw came slow that year. Snow melted in streaks, dripping from the eaves like ticking clocks, each drop marking borrowed time. Mud swallowed the old paths, and the trees stood naked, shaking off winter's grip. But danger didn't melt with the snow. It lingered close, watchful. Abigail could feel it, in the way the crows circled overhead, in how Caleb checked the traps with his hand on the revolver. Something unspoken hung between them now. Not fear exactly, but the knowledge that whatever peace they'd carved into the wilderness was cracking, and something cold and mean waited to break through. They slept in shifts, fortified the cabin more each day. Caleb even buried extra rifles behind the shed, just in case. They won't let it go, he said one night, voice low as they sat by the fire. They'll come back. Then we be ready, Abigail said simply. He glanced at her, and in her eyes, he didn't see fear, only resolve. That same quiet strength that had kept her walking through a blizzard. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing her ground. 3 days later, they came. It was just past dawn when the first shot rang out, splintering the frame of the cabin door. Caleb dropped the coffee pot, dragged Abigail to the floor. Stay low, he hissed, grabbing the rifle from the wall. From outside, voices called. Come out, McGraw. We ain't got all morning. Abigail crawled to the back window, peeked through the slats. 4 of them, maybe 5, horses tied to the trees. They're set tin up like they're fixin' to burn us out. Caleb cursed under his breath. They're serious this time. She turned to him. You could run. I won't. They want you. Not me. He looked at her, jaw tight. Don't ask me to leave you behind. She didn't. Instead, she went to the pantry and pulled out the shotgun. Checked the shells like she'd done it 100 times. He blinked. You ever used one? Once, she said. Shot a rattler clean through in Kansas. Figure man's no different. Caleb almost smiled. They come through that door, you shoot. Don't wait. Outside, a voice barked. "You've got till the count of 5. Won't matter," Caleb muttered. "They ain't counting past 2. Then the world erupted. Gunfire burst through the windows. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Caleb fired back through a crack in the shutter. A scream rang out. Someone hit. Abigail, crouched near the stove, let off a blast that blew a hole through the door. A man cursed and fell back. Smoke filled the room. Her ears rang. The acrid scent of gunpowder mixed with pine and blood. Caleb moved like a shadow, reloading, firing, always one step ahead. But they were outnumbered. "I've got to flank him," he said suddenly. "Draw him off. You'll be killed." He touched her arm. "If they breach this door, you won't stand a chance. You hold them here. I'll circle round. When you hear me fire, run for the tree line. I won't leave without you. You'll have to." He was gone before she could argue, slipping out the back, low to the ground, silent as death. Abigail gripped the shotgun, heart hammering. Minutes passed, felt like hours. Voices outside rose, arguing. Then another gunshot. Then 2. Then silence. She held her breath. Then a cry. "He's behind us." All hell broke loose. Abigail threw open the door and ran, skirts hitched high. Smoke billowed from the chimney. Gunshots cracked through the trees. She saw Caleb, crouched behind a fallen log, exchanging fire with 2 men near the creek. Another man spotted her, raised his rifle. She dove behind a stump as the shot whistled past. Then she rose and fired, once, twice. The man fell hard, not moving. Caleb looked her way, blood on his sleeve. "You all right?" She nodded, gasping. "You're hit. Grazed. I'll live." They regrouped behind a thicket. The air was thick with powder and breathless curses. Only one man remained now, Jeb, the leader. He was nowhere in sight. Then a shout came from the trees. "You think this is over, Caleb? You don't get to walk away clean." Caleb called back. "You're the one that came to my door. You killed my brother in Carson. Left him to rot. He killed a family for $50. Still my kin. Blood pays for blood." Abigail touched Caleb's arm. "He's not going to stop." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then it ends here." He stepped out from the cover, rifle lowered. "Let's settle this, Jeb. You and me." Silence. Then a figure emerged from the trees, tall, scarred, gun drawn. Jeb grinned. "Always did have a hero streak." "No heroes here," Caleb said. "Just a man with nothing left to lose." Jeb raised his pistol. Abigail held her breath. Then, asterisk crack, asterisk. The shot echoed across the trees. Jeb staggered, gun slipping from his fingers. He dropped to his knees, then fell face first into the mud. Caleb lowered the rifle. That was for Sarah. Abigail ran to him, hands trembling. "You're bleeding," she said again. He winced. "It'll keep." She wrapped her arms around him, pressed her face to his chest. The birds were just starting to sing again. Life, stubborn and relentless, returning to the land. They burned the bodies, said no words. There was nothing left to say to the dead. That night, they sat by the fire in silence. Caleb's arm bandaged. Abigail's dress still streaked with dirt and blood. "I used to dream of dying," Caleb said finally. "After Sarah and Eli, I wanted the pain to stop. Thought maybe if I ran far enough, did enough bad, I could outrun the hurt." She looked at him. "But then you came," he said, half dead and stubborn as a mule. "And suddenly, I didn't want to die no more. I wanted to live again." Abigail swallowed hard. "I came to this land thinking I was finished. Too old. Unwanted. But I think maybe this was where I was always meant to be." He reached for her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. "You saved me, Abigail. You saved me first." They sat that way until dawn, 2 broken souls stitched back together by firelight, blood, and a second chance. When spring finally arrived for good, they planted wildflowers where the old cabin once stood. Rebuilt it together, stronger, warmer. People came through sometimes, heading west, hungry for land and hope. Caleb and Abigail offered food, a bed, and stories. But they never spoke much of the winter, or the blood that soaked into the earth. What mattered was what came after. Because sometimes love doesn't come soft and sweet. Sometimes it comes with a gunshot, in the mud, in the fire. in the hands of someone who's lost everything and still chooses you. And that's the kind worth keeping. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Let them know it's never too late to be chosen.